The first thing Commander Rhea Vasquez saw through the canopy of the Kestrel 9 was a ship that shouldn't have been there. It was Oveth, Dagger class, drifting bow down at 7 degrees off the ecliptic with its port engine array cold and its starboard venting plasma in a slow, orange bleed that caught the light of the Sareth binary like a wound refusing to clot. The hull registry read CVK 1140, and according to Vasquez's tactical feed, the CVK 1140 had been decommissioned 9 years ago. Yet here it was broken, bleeding, and broadcasting. "Contact bearing 035 Mark 12, she said into the squadron net. "Oveth warship, Dagger class, she's venting and dark." Lieutenant Hollowell's voice came back flat. "Oveth Compact doesn't operate in this corridor, Commander. Not for the last 6 years." "I can see that." Vasquez adjusted the Kestrel 9's heading by 2 degrees, bringing the crippled warship into the center of her forward display. Behind her, spread in a loose patrol diamond, the other 3 birds of her flight, Kestrel 7, Kestrel 11, Kestrel 14, matched the correction without being told. They were good pilots. They didn't need to be told twice about anything. "What I can't see is why she's out here bleeding in the dark." Her co-pilot, Ensign Darrow, pulled the scan returns and laid them on the secondary display. Hull breaches along the ventral line. Atmosphere loss in at least 4 compartments. Power signature dropping in a pattern that suggested cascading failures, one system dragging the next one down like dominoes falling in slow motion. And Darrow tapped the readout twice with his knuckle to make sure the display wasn't glitching. A distress beacon. Active. Broadcasting on the Oveth Compact's sovereign emergency band, encrypted with their military cipher, aimed at the Compact's sector relay at Toven Station. "She's calling for help," Darrow said, "but not from us." Vasquez let that sit for 3 seconds. The Oveth Compact and Earth's combined fleet had no operational relationship, no mutual defense pact, no shared patrol corridors. The Compact's ambassador, a tall, angular Oveth male with skin the color of wet slate and a voice like gravel being sorted, had made that clear at the Sareth Accords 41 years ago, when Earth had offered a standard bilateral defense clause. "We are not your allies," he'd said, and the Compact's delegation had walked out of the session without touching the treaty document. Except they had touched it. Vasquez didn't know that yet. Nobody in her flight did. Nobody on Earth's Combined Fleet Command did either, because the document they'd filed under Sareth Bilateral, unsigned, Oveth Compact had been misfiled. The ambassador had walked out, yes. But his aide, a junior diplomatic attaché named Keth Sorano, who would later die in a transport accident and never correct the record, had returned to the signing chamber 6 hours later, alone, and pressed the Compact's sovereign seal to Article 9. Mutual emergency response. He'd done it because the clause was reciprocal, because the Compact's border sectors were thin, because the aide had read the intelligence estimates about the Drethari hegemony's expansion, and decided that having Earth's fleet on the other end of a panic button was worth more than the ambassador's pride. The seal had been logged, the treaty had been filed, and for 41 years both sides had forgotten it existed. Until now. "Commander," Darrow said, his voice careful. "The distress beacon, it's not just broadcasting on the Compact's band. There's a secondary carrier, subharmonic. It's riding underneath the main signal like a shadow frequency." "Where's it aimed?" Darrow checked again, ran the signal path through the nav computer's relay map, and the map came back with a line that pointed at Earth's emergency response net, a system that had been listening on every compatible band for over a century, quietly logging every signal that matched its treaty clause triggers. He turned his head and looked at Vasquez with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. "Us," he said. "It's aimed at us, at Earth's emergency response net. The beacon is triggering a treaty response clause. Article 9 of the Sareth Bilateral Defense Pact." Vasquez's hands went still on the flight stick. The Sarith bilateral was never signed. The system says it was, 41 years ago. Sovereign seal authenticated. The beacon hit Article 9's automated trigger 7 minutes ago, and the response chain is already active. Active how? Active as in Fleet Command has already acknowledged receipt. Active as in the 3rd Expeditionary Group is already spinning up drives at Korath Station. Darrow paused and read the cascade on his display with the kind of focused attention people give to information they don't want to be accurate. Active as in a full response package is inbound. 14 capital ships, 6 hospital transports, 2 engineering tenders. Fleet Admiral Chen is assuming tactical command from the Resolute. Vasquez sat back in her seat. 14 capital ships. For a single drifting Oveth warship that had called its own people for help and hadn't called Earth at all. How long, she asked. First elements arrive in 93 minutes. Full group on station in 4 hours. And the Compact's own response. Darrow checked the Oveth Sovereign Band. The CVK 1140 had been broadcasting its distress call for 11 hours. Toven Station, the Compact's nearest relay, had logged the signal. It had not dispatched a response. The signal had been queued behind a scheduled maintenance cycle. Nothing, Darrow said. Their own people haven't answered. Vasquez looked at the crippled Oveth warship through the canopy glass. The plasma bleed was getting worse. The hull breach count on Darrow's display had ticked from 4 to 6 while they'd been talking. She keyed the squadron net. All Kestrels, Titan formation, were moving in to render assistance. Hollowell came back immediately. Commander, the Compact has no agreement with us. Their sovereign space begins. Apparently they do have an agreement with us, Lieutenant. A 41-year-old one that nobody read. And right now their ship is dying in front of us, and their own fleet is busy with a maintenance schedule. Flight on me. She pushed the throttle forward. The Kestrel 9's engines kicked, and the patrol flight of 4 light interceptors, the smallest, fastest, least equipped ships in Earth's inventory, began their approach toward a warship 3 times their combined mass. They were the wrong response. 4 patrol birds with no medical bay, no engineering capability, no towing gear. But they were what was here, and the thing about duty was that it didn't wait for the right tools. It worked with what showed up. Darrow had the CVK 1140 schematics on his secondary display now, pulled from Earth's foreign vessel database. The Dagger class was a mid-range patrol warship, 140 meters bow to stern, crew complement of 170, designed for extended autonomous operations in border sectors where the nearest resupply was weeks away. That meant the CVK 1140 had been built to take damage and keep flying. That it was in this state meant whatever had hit it had hit hard, hit fast, and hit in exactly the places the Dagger class couldn't compensate for. Commander, Darrow said, reading the power curves, at her current rate of decline, she loses secondary life support in approximately 90 minutes. After that, the crew in the forward compartments start suffocating. How many in the forward compartments? Based on standard Dagger-class berthing layouts, roughly half the crew. 80 plus. Vasquez did the math. 90 minutes until forward life support failed. 87 minutes until the first elements of the 3rd Expeditionary Group arrived. A 3-minute margin that assumed nothing else went wrong on a ship where everything was going wrong. Hollowell, she said over the squadron net, when we dock, I want you and your kit in the nearest compartment with wounded. Don't wait for me. Don't wait for authorization. Find the wounded, start working. Understood, Commander. No objection this time. Hollowell had heard the numbers too. The CVK 1140's bridge was still broadcasting. Vasquez tuned her comms to the Oveth military frequency, technically a violation of 6 different protocols, every one of which she'd memorize for the debrief later, and transmitted in the clear. Oveth vessel CVK 1140, This is Commander Rhea Vasquez, Earth Combined Fleet Kestrel Flight. We have received your distress beacon and are inbound to render assistance. Please advise your status and crew complement." Silence. 11 seconds of it, long enough for Vasquez to count each one against the pulse in her wrist. Then a voice came back, rough and broken, speaking Oveth standard with the accent of someone who'd been breathing recycled air for too long. "Earth vessel, this is Subcommander Toreth Kell of the CVK 1140. We did not," a pause. A sound that might have been the subcommander checking his own comms panel, verifying what his instruments were telling him against what his training said was impossible. "We did not transmit to Earth. Our beacon is aimed at Toven Station." "Copy, CVK 1140. Your beacon triggered an automated treaty clause on our emergency net. We're the closest element. What's your situation?" Another silence, longer this time. When Kell came back, his voice had changed. It was quieter. The rough edge was still there, but underneath it was something Vasquez recognized from every damaged ship she'd ever approached, the sound of a commanding officer recalculating his options and finding one he hadn't expected. "Earth vessel, we have 167 crew aboard. Hull integrity is failing in sections 3 through 9. We have lost primary life support in the forward compartments. Secondary systems are at 31% and declining. Our medical bay is offline. We have 42 wounded, 11 critical, a beat. We have been broadcasting for 11 hours. Toven has not responded." "Understood, Subcommander. I have 4 patrol interceptors, no heavy equipment, but Earth's 3rd Expeditionary Group is inbound. 14 capital ships, 6 hospital transports, 2 engineering tenders. First elements in 87 minutes. Can you hold?" The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a man standing on a bridge watching his ship come apart around him, who had called his own people for help and been put on hold, and who was now being told that a species his government had publicly refused an alliance with 41 years ago was sending 14 warships to pull him out. "Commander Vasquez," Kell said finally, "we are not your allies." "I've heard that before, Subcommander. My flight is 3 minutes out. We're going to dock with your port airlock and start triage on your critical wounded. My pilots are cross-trained in field medicine. It's not much, but it's what we have until the heavies arrive." She cut the channel and looked at Darrow. "Get me the docking specs for a Dagger-class port airlock." "Already pulling them." Darrow's hands moved across his console. "Commander, the Pact is going to file a sovereignty complaint. We're entering their vessel without authorization from their chain of command." "The treaty gives us authorization. Article 9, Mutual Emergency Response. If their chain of command wanted to handle this, they had 11 hours. And if the treaty turns out to be a filing error, then I'll explain to a review board why I chose to dock with a dying ship instead of watching it come apart through my canopy. Get me those specs." The Kestrel 9 closed the distance in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Vasquez brought her bird alongside the CVK 1140's port airlock with the kind of precise, unhurried flying that looked easy and wasn't threading between the plasma vent and a piece of hull debris that had torn free and was tumbling slowly in the binary's light. The Oveth docking collar was wider than Earth standard by 8 centimeters. Someone in Earth's engineering corps had decided, decades ago, that any ship small enough to be first on scene should be able to dock with anything. The patrol interceptors carried universal docking adapters for exactly this kind of situation. The adapter sealed, atmosphere equalized. Vasquez pulled her sidearm from the flight locker, not because she expected trouble, but because entering a foreign military vessel was entering a foreign military vessel, and cycled the airlock. The smell hit her first: burnt insulation, leaking coolant, the sharp, ammonia-edged scent that Oveth biology produced under extreme stress. The corridor beyond the airlock was dark except for emergency strips along the deck, pulsing a dull amber that cast everything in sick, tired light. The gravity was wrong, heavier than Earth standard by about 15%, which meant the Oveth homeworld was denser, which meant every step Vasquez took required fractionally more effort than her body expected. After an 11-hour shift in that gravity on a damaged ship, the Oveth crew would be approaching exhaustion from the simple act of moving. She filed that alongside the life support numbers and the hull breach count and kept walking. Subcommander Toreth Kell was waiting for her. He was tall, most Oveth were, with the slate-gray skin and the narrow, ridge-lined face common to the military caste. His uniform was torn at the left shoulder, and the fabric below the tier was stiff with dried blood that had oxidized to a dark greenish-black. His eyes were the color of unpolished brass, and they were looking at Vasquez with an expression that was not hostility, not gratitude, not fear. It was something quieter. Something like a man watching a fact he'd been told his entire career. We are not their allies. They are not ours. Come apart in front of him. Commander Vasquez, he said. His voice was steady. Your docking adapter is compatible with our airlock. We carry universal adapters. You carry universal adapters. He repeated it like a man writing it down in a report he'd file later. On patrol interceptors. On everything, Sub-Commander. Where are your critical wounded? He led her down the corridor. The emergency strips cast long amber shadows that made the Oveth ship's architecture look older than it was. The corridors were wider than Earth standard, the ceilings higher, the doorframes shaped for a species that averaged 30 centimeters taller than humans. Twice, Vasquez had to step over debris fields, ceiling panels that had come loose, cable runs hanging like entrails. A section of deck plating buckled upward by the force of a hull breached 2 levels below. Water, or what passed for water in Oveth coolant systems, dripped from a ruptured line overhead, keeping a slow count that nobody wanted to reach zero. Kell walked through it without slowing down. He'd been walking through it for 11 hours. At the junction of corridors 4 and 7, they passed a sealed bulkhead door. Kell paused beside it. Through the door's small viewport window, Vasquez could see darkness, no emergency strips, no ambient light. Nothing. Section 8, Kell said. 26 crew were in that section when the breach occurred. We sealed the bulkhead to prevent atmosphere loss to the rest of the ship. His voice was flat, procedural. 14 of those crew made it through before we sealed. 12 did not. Vasquez looked at the sealed door. Are they? The containment field in Section 8 failed within minutes of the breach. The section is open to vacuum. He paused. They are still in there. He turned and kept walking. Vasquez followed. Some facts didn't need commentary. They just needed to be known and carried and eventually put in a report that someone would read and file, and that would change nothing about the 12 people on the other side of that door. 2 corridors later, they reached the forward mess hall. Kestrel 7 docked 90 seconds after Vasquez. Lieutenant Hollowell came through the airlock with a field trauma kit in each hand and didn't say a word. His face was set in the expression of a man who had opinions about this, but was going to keep them until the work was done. Kestrel 11 and Kestrel 14 docked within another minute. And suddenly there were 8 humans aboard an Oveth warship that had never expected to see one, moving through dark corridors with flashlights and medical kits, and the kind of focused, unsentimental efficiency that came from training for exactly this. The medical bay was wrecked. Something had punched through the exterior hull and taken the main surgical suite with it. Vasquez could see stars through the emergency containment field that shimmered across the breach. The hard light of the Sareth binary pouring through like daylight through a broken window. The Oveth medics, 3 of them, 2 wounded themselves, had set up a triage station in the forward mess hall using dining tables and whatever supplies they could carry. 42 wounded lay on those tables and on the deck around them, some quiet, some not. The worst sound in the room wasn't the groaning. It was the silence from the ones who'd stopped. Vasquez's pilots weren't doctors. They were patrol interceptor crews cross-trained in combat medicine, the kind of training that taught you how to stop bleeding, stabilize a fracture, maintain an airway, and keep someone alive until actual medical personnel arrived. They didn't know Ovith physiology, but Darrow had pulled the xenobiology quick reference during the approach, and the Ovith medics were right there. "Tell us what to do," Vasquez said to the senior Ovith medic, a woman named Eshara whose left arm was splinted with a length of conduit pipe, and whose eyes carried the flat, empty look of someone who'd been deciding who to treat first for far too long. "Point at the patient, tell us the procedure, we'll execute." Eshara looked at her for 2 seconds. Her gaze went to the Earth Combined Fleet patch on Vasquez's flight suit, then to the field trauma kit in Darrow's hands, then back to Vasquez's face. "You know Ovith circulatory pressure points?" she asked. "No, show me once and I'll know." Eshara pointed at the nearest critical case, an Ovith engineer with a chest wound that was still seeping through the improvised dressing, his breathing shallow and wet, and started talking. What followed was a crash course in alien medicine delivered in broken standard and hand gestures by a woman who hadn't slept in 11 hours and whose dominant arm was in a splint. Eshara was efficient. She didn't waste words on explanation. She showed Vasquez the pressure point, demonstrated the motion, waited until Vasquez replicated it, corrected once and moved on. The ovothoracic membrane was a secondary respiratory structure that humans didn't have, a thin, cartilage-reinforced layer between the primary lung cavity and the secondary circulatory loop. When it ruptured, the secondary loop flooded, and the patient drowned from the inside. Sealing it required finding the membrane's edge, a ridge of cartilage that felt under Vasquez's fingers like a guitar string buried under wet sand, and applying pressure with a specific rhythm that Eshara counted out loud. 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, until the membrane's own biological adhesion kicked in and the seal held. Vasquez got it wrong the first time. The pressure was too steady. The membrane slipped. Eshara corrected her grip with her good hand, firm and without judgment, and Vasquez got it right the second time. The seal held. The patient's breathing stabilized from shallow and wet to shallow and dry, which Eshara acknowledged with a single nod. Then she pointed at the next one. The next 79 minutes were the longest and shortest of Vasquez's career. She learned how to seal an ovothoracic membrane by pressing 2 fingers against a ridge of cartilage she didn't know existed until Eshara put her hand on it. She learned that Ovith blood coagulated slower than human blood, but responded to direct pressure applied in a pattern 3 seconds on, 1 second off. Repeat. That was nothing like the steady pressure she'd been trained on. She learned that the ammonia-edged stress scent got stronger when the patient was in pain and weaker when they were losing consciousness, and that losing consciousness in an Ovith meant the secondary circulatory loop was shutting down. And once that happened, you had about 4 minutes to get it restarted before the damage became permanent. Darrow worked beside her, his hands steady, his face blank with concentration. He didn't flinch when the first patient's blood hit his flight gloves, the greenish-black Ovith hemoglobin that smelled like copper and ammonia, and something else he couldn't name. He just kept working. Hollowell was 2 tables over, applying a tourniquet under the guidance of an Ovith medic whose own leg was in a splint made from a broken chair. The medic's hands were shaking from pain, but her voice was steady when she talked Hollowell through the tie-off sequence. 3 wraps, tension on the second, release on the third, repeat until the flow stopped. Okafor and Mbeki were deeper in the mess hall, working the less critical cases, fractures, burns, a concussion that needed monitoring, a crewman whose arm had been pinned under a fallen stanchion for 6 hours, and who needed the circulation restored carefully or the toxin buildup would stop his heart. 20 minutes in, the secondary life support dropped from 31% to 26%. The air in the mess hall thinned. 3 of the wounded who were breathing on their own started laboring, their chests rising and falling faster, each breath a little shallower than the last. "Eshara," Vasquez said without looking up from the chest wound she was sealing. "Your life support, how long at this rate?" "At current decline, 40 minutes until the atmosphere in this compartment is non-viable for Ovith respiration." Vasquez keyed her flight channel. "All Kestrels, pull your emergency O2 canisters and distribute. 2 per interceptor, 8 total." "Commander," Hollowell said from the next table, his hands still working the tourniquet, "those are our emergency reserves. If we need to EVA, then we'll hold our breath, Lieutenant. Right now these people need air more than we need a contingency." The O2 canisters were designed for human standard atmosphere, but Darrow had already run the conversion. Ovith atmosphere was close enough in composition that the canisters would extend breathable air by roughly 43 minutes in a space the size of the mess hall. It wasn't elegant. It was math applied to desperation, and it bought them time. At minute 28, a hull breach in Section 7, 2 decks below the mess hall, expanded. Vasquez felt it through the deck plates, a low shudder that ran through the ship's frame like a tremor in a building. The emergency strips flickered. One of the wounded cried out. Eshara's splinted arm jerked sideways, and she caught herself against the table edge with a sound that was all breath and no voice. "Structural failure in 7, Kell's voice came over the shipwide channel, calm and flat and tired. "Containment fields holding. All personnel in forward sections, stay in place." The shudder passed. The emergency strip steadied. But the life support readout on Darrow's wrist display dropped from 26% to 23%, and the 43-minute window their O2 canisters had bought shrank to 31%. At minute 35, one of the critical cases died. An Ovith navigation officer with internal bleeding that no amount of pressure or improvised intervention could stop. Eshara called it quietly, a single phrase in Ovith standard that needed no translation, a sound that was the same in any language, and moved to the next patient without pausing. There wasn't time to pause. There wasn't room for it. Vasquez watched her do it, and understood something about Eshara that she hadn't understood before. The medic wasn't numb. She was operating on a reserve of will that had been draining for 11 hours, and every patient she moved to was a decision to keep that reserve open a little longer instead of letting it close. At minute 41, power to the mess hall's lighting flickered again. It came back, dimmer. Kell appeared in the doorway on another of his rounds. The man had been circuiting the ship every 20 minutes for 11 hours, checking wounded, speaking to crew, keeping the thing together by the sheer fact of his presence, and his eyes went straight to the flickering overheads. "Secondary grid is failing in this section," he said. "I have 2 engineers rerouting from the aft bus. 10 minutes. "We have 26 minutes of supplemental O2 in here," Vasquez said. "After that, your people start suffocating." Kell looked at her. At the Ovith blood on her hands, the greenish-black kind that wouldn't wash out of human skin for days. At the chest wound she was still sealing, the 8th one she'd worked on, each one a variation on a technique she'd learned less than an hour ago. "Your engineers are fast?" he asked. "Your engineers are the ones rerouting. I'm just keeping people alive until they finish." He left, the lights stayed dim, the air stayed thin. Vasquez kept working. At minute 53, the Ovith engineers got the reroute done. The life support readout climbed from 23% to 34%, not full, not safe, but enough that the wounded stopped laboring for each breath. The O2 canisters had 9 minutes left on them. Vasquez noted the margin and filed it in the part of her mind that tracked resource margins, the way other people track time. At minute 62, a second patient died. Not one of the critical cases, a crew member from the secondary triage group who'd been listed as stable, whose internal injuries had been masked by the adrenaline of the first hour, and who quietly decompensated while Mbeki was checking his fracture splint. Mbeki didn't realize it for almost a minute. The oveth signs of cardiac arrest were different from human ones, a stillness rather than a convulsion. And by the time Eshara got there, it was over. Mbeki didn't say anything. She went back to the next patient. But Vasquez saw her hands shake for the first time, and she saw Mbeki tighten her grip on the splint kit until her knuckles went white, and she knew what that cost. At minute 67, an oveth crew member, not medical staff, not wounded, just a young engineer named Seveth who'd been running errands between the triage area and the engineering teams, appeared beside Vasquez with a container of something warm. He held it out to her. "Drink," he said in halting standard. "You have been working for 1 hour. You have not stopped." Vasquez looked at the container. It smelled like heated grain and something sharp she couldn't identify. "What is it?" "Oveth field ration, liquid. It is safe for human consumption. We checked." She took it. She drank it in 3 swallows. It tasted like warm oatmeal crossed with black pepper, and it hit her system like a shot of caffeine cut with something steadier. She handed the container back. "Thank you, Seveth." He nodded and moved on to Hollowell, who took the container without looking up from the tourniquet he was adjusting. Then to Okafor. Then to Mbeki. Then to Darrow. 5 containers for 5 humans. Someone in the Oveth crew, in the middle of watching their own ship die, had taken the time to check whether their field rations were compatible with human biology, and then brewed enough for the people who'd come to help. Vasquez went back to work. The ration settled into her bloodstream and steadied her hands, and she didn't think about what it meant until later. What it meant was that the Oveth crew had decided, somewhere in the past hour, that the humans working in their mess hall were worth feeding. 6 of the 11 critical cases stabilized. 2 more held steady. 3 were beyond what anyone in that room could do without a surgical suite: the navigation officer who died, the 2nd crew member who decompensated, and 1 more whose injuries required equipment that didn't exist on a gutted mess hall table. Eshara made the call on the last one. Stable enough to survive if help arrived within the hour, dead if it didn't. At minute 79, Darrow's voice came over Vasquez's helmet comm. It was the first time his voice had carried anything other than flat professionalism all day. "Commander, the 3rd Expeditionary Group just dropped out of FTL. 14 capital ships. The Resolute is hailing." Vasquez looked up from her work. Through the mess hall's viewport, cracked, starred with impact damage, but still holding, she could see them. They came out of fold space in a staggered line that filled the viewport from edge to edge. The TCS Resolute, a Vanguard-class dreadnought, led the formation, a ship so large that at this distance it blocked out the smaller of the Sarith binary's 2 stars. Behind it, in disciplined echelon, came the rest: 4 heavy cruisers, 3 destroyer escorts, 2 fleet support ships, and then the hospital transports 6 white-hulled medical vessels with the Red Cross of Earth's humanitarian service painted on their flanks, each one larger than the CVK 1140. And behind those, the 2 engineering tenders, massive, slow, bristling with repair gantries and fabrication bays and the kind of industrial capability that could rebuild a ship from the keel up. 24 ships. For 1 damaged Oveth warship crewed by 167 souls who had called their own people for help and been put on hold. Subcommander Kell was in the mess hall doorway. He stood there and looked through the cracked viewport at Earth's 3rd Expeditionary Group, and his face went through something Vasquez would remember for the rest of her career. It wasn't shock. It wasn't relief. It was the expression of a man watching a treaty clause he'd never known existed deliver a response scaled for a full theater engagement to save his 1 broken ship. "Subcommander," Vasquez said, her hand still working the wound dressing on the last critical case. "Fleet Admiral Chen is requesting permission to begin rescue operations." Kell's brass-colored eyes moved from the viewport to Vasquez. "Requesting permission." Your ship, your crew, your sovereign space. We need your authorization." He looked back at the viewport. The Resolute was already deploying shuttle flights. Vasquez could see the running lights of the first wave, 30-plus personnel shuttles forming up in an approach pattern that was textbook Earth rescue doctrine. Behind them, one of the hospital transports was maneuvering to bring its portside trauma bay within docking range. "I have been calling Tovin Station for 12 hours, Kell said quietly. "They have not answered. You answered a call I did not make to you, with a fleet I did not know you would send, under a treaty I did not know existed. And now your admiral is asking my permission." "That's how we do this, Sub-Commander." "How you do this?" He said it the way he'd said universal adapters, like a man cataloging a fact about a species he thought he understood and was realizing he did not. "Permission granted, Commander Vasquez. All decks, all sections. Your people are—" He paused. The pause lasted longer than any of the pauses before. "Your people are welcome aboard." The first shuttle wave hit the CVK 1140's hangar bay 11 minutes later. The shuttles came in fast and clean, 3 at a time through the bay's emergency field, disgorging medical teams in white and engineering crews in gray, their equipment cases stacked on anti-grav sleds that hummed through the corridors like the ship had been designed for them. The last critical case, the one Ashara had said would die without a surgical suite within the hour, was in a hospital transport's operating theater within 14 minutes. The other 2 survivable critical cases followed. The hospital transport's chief surgeon, a Commander Adami, assessed each patient, issued evacuation orders, and had them moving in under 4 minutes apiece. "Your triage was clean," Adami said to Vasquez as the last stretcher moved through the doorway. "Oveth thoracic seal work." "First time." "Your seal on the engineer with the chest wound kept his secondary lung functional for 40 minutes. That was good work." "The work was Medic Ashara's." "I just did what she told me." Adami looked at her for a moment, the look of a surgeon who understood that medicine was one person telling another person where to put their hands, and that the hands mattered more than the credentials behind them. Then she moved on, and the machinery of Earth's fleet-scale medical response swallowed the mess hall whole. The engineering tenders extended their repair gantries within the hour, and began sealing hull breaches with the methodical patience of people who fixed ships for a living. A full damage control team from the Resolute came aboard and worked alongside the CVK 1140's own crew, sealing compartments, restoring atmosphere, rerouting power from backup systems that the Oveth engineers had already partially jury-rigged in the 11 hours they'd been alone. Vasquez watched an Earth engineering petty officer and an Oveth hull technician standing side by side at a breach in Section 5, running a molecular bond sealer across a torn bulkhead. They didn't speak the same language. They didn't need to. The petty officer pointed at the tier, made a motion with the sealer. The technician adjusted the sealer's settings for Oveth hull alloy, a composition the Earth tool wasn't calibrated for, and indicated a different angle. The petty officer adjusted and ran the seal. It held. They moved to the next breach without a word. In Section 3, the Resolute's damage control team found a structural member that had fractured clean through, a load-bearing beam that was the only thing keeping the forward hull section attached to the rest of the ship. The Oveth crew had known about it. They'd braced it with cargo straps and nothing else, and it had held for 12 hours through material stubbornness. The Resolute's team replaced the cargo straps with a portable structural brace that weighed more than the Kestrel 9, and they had it in place in 22 minutes. In the engine room, a joint team of Earth and Oveth engineers was rebuilding the port engine array from components fabricated aboard one of the engineering tenders. The tender's fabrication bay had the CVK 1140's engine specifications on file. Earth's foreign vessel database contained detailed technical profiles of every warship class operated by every species Earth had ever encountered, including species that had told Earth they weren't interested in a relationship. Someone in Earth's Technical Intelligence Division had decided, years ago, that knowing how to fix a ship was just as important as knowing how to fight one. The CVK 1140's chief engineer, a stocky Oveth woman named Torin who had been holding the starboard engine together with bypass patches and personal stubbornness for 11 hours, watched the Earth fabrication team produce a replacement plasma injector assembly in 14 minutes and install it in 9. She didn't say anything. She stood there with her arms folded and her eyes moving between the human technicians and the component they were installing, and when the port engine came back online, and the drive engaged for the first time in 12 hours, and the ship shuddered with something between a groan and a sigh, Torin uncrossed her arms and walked over to the lead Earth technician and said one word in accented standard. "How?" The technician looked up from the diagnostic readout. "We keep specs on file for every allied and non-allied vessel class, just in case." "We are not allied." The technician shrugged. "The specs don't know that." In the corridors, Oveth crew members stopped what they were doing as the drive hummed back to life and looked up, and for the first time since Vasquez had come aboard, some of them smiled. Vasquez stayed. Her flight stayed. They weren't needed anymore. The fleet had doctors, engineers, specialists in everything her pilots had been improvising at. But they stayed because they'd started this, and because the Oveth crew had begun to look at them differently, and because leaving now would break something that had been built in a wrecked mess hall by 8 humans and 3 wounded Oveth medics working a problem together. She was in the CVK 1140's partially restored bridge when the transmission came in from Toven Station. Kel was there, seated in his command chair for the first time since she'd come aboard. Someone from the hospital transport had finally treated his shoulder wound, and the fresh bandage was bright white against his slate-gray skin. Fleet Admiral Chen was on the main display, conducting a status review from the Resolute's flag bridge. And Toven Station, which had logged the CVK 1140's distress call 12.5 hours ago and queued it behind a maintenance cycle, finally responded. "CVK 1140, this is Toven Station dispatch. Your distress beacon has been logged and prioritized. A response corvette has been assigned. Estimated time of arrival, 19 hours. The bridge went quiet. Kel looked at the display. He looked at Fleet Admiral Chen's image, still on the screen, still calmly reviewing repair progress. He looked through the bridge viewport at the 24 Earth ships holding station around his warship, their running lights steady in the Sareth binary's light. "Toven Station," he said, his voice carrying the careful, measured tone of a man who was going to say this once and let the record carry it forward. "Be advised that emergency response has already been rendered. Earth's 3rd Expeditionary Group arrived on station 12 hours before your corvette's estimated arrival. All crew are accounted for. Critical wounded are in surgery aboard Earth's hospital transports. Hull repairs are underway." A long pause from Toven. "CVK 1140, confirm Earth's fleet is on station." "Under what authority?" "Under Article 9 of the Sareth Bilateral Defense Pact, signed 41 years ago." "That pact was not signed." "It was. Check your archives." Subcommander Kel out. He closed the channel. Fleet Admiral Chen, still on the display, said nothing. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady eyes, and she had the kind of command presence that didn't require speaking. She brought 14 capital ships and 10 support vessels across 4 sectors in 93 minutes on the automated authority of a treaty clause nobody on her staff had heard of, because the system said it was valid, and because a ship was dying, and because that was enough. "Admiral," Kel said, "your commander Vasquez and her flight arrived 80 minutes before your group. 4 patrol interceptors, no medical bay, no engineering capability. She docked with my ship and put her pilots to work on my wounded." Chen nodded. "That's what patrol flights do, Subcommander." Your patrol flights carry universal docking adapters. Standard equipment. Standard equipment. Kel's voice was very quiet. Your smallest ships are equipped to dock with anyone. We designed them that way. Kel looked at Vasquez. She was standing by the bridge viewport, her flight suit stained with Oveth blood, and she was running a status check on her flight's fuel reserves, because even now she was a pilot and pilots tracked their fuel. "Commander," he said, "why did you come?" She looked up from her wrist display. "Your beacon triggered our treaty clause. You did not know the treaty existed when you saw my ship." That was true. Vasquez had made the approach before Darrow had identified the treaty trigger. She turned her flight toward the CVK 1140 because it was a ship in distress, and she was the closest vessel, and that was the beginning and the end of the calculation. "No," she said, "I didn't." "Then why?" She thought about it for a moment, not because the answer was complicated, but because the answer was simple, and simple answers sometimes needed a moment to be said right. "Because you were dying, Sub-Commander, and I was here." Kel was quiet for a long time after that. The bridge hummed around them, the newly restored systems running clean, the viewport showing Earth's fleet holding position in a formation that was technically a standard defensive screen, but was functionally a wall between the CVK 1140 and anything that might threaten it. In the distance, through the bridge's starboard viewport, Vasquez could see one of the hospital transports running with its surgical bays illuminated, bright white light pouring from the windows like a building on a dark street, steady and doing the kind of work that happened behind closed doors and didn't ask for recognition. Ishara had been evacuated to that transport an hour ago. Her own injuries, the splinted arm plus 3 cracked ribs she hadn't mentioned, had finally been addressed by Commander Adami's medical team. Vasquez had watched her go, walking under her own power, pausing at the airlock to look back at the mess hall where she'd kept people alive for 11 hours with a broken arm and a shrinking air supply. Then she'd turned and walked through, and the airlock had closed behind her. Kel sat with that. Then he reached into his uniform jacket, the torn one, the sleeve cut away for the bandage, and pulled out a small device. It was a personal seal, the Oveth equivalent of a signature stamp, keyed to the user's biometrics. He set it on the armrest of his command chair and looked at it. 41 years ago, he said, my government's ambassador told yours that the Oveth Compact would not be Earth's ally, that we did not need your treaty, that we would not sign. I've read the file, Vasquez said. Someone signed anyway, a junior aide. I have been running through the delegation records while your engineers repair my ship, and I believe I know who. His name was Keth Sorano. He would have been, Kel paused, calculating. 23 years old, the youngest member of the delegation. He died in a transport accident 4 years later. He never told anyone what he'd done. And nobody checked. Nobody checked. For 41 years, the Compact's official position was that the Sarith bilateral was unsigned. And for 41 years, your system had it filed as active, sealed, and enforceable. Article 9, Mutual Emergency Response, automatically triggered by any distress beacon broadcasting on a compatible frequency within range of an Earth relay. Which is how a signal you aimed at your own people landed on our emergency net. Yes, Kel picked up the seal, turned it in his fingers. A 23-year-old aide with more foresight than his ambassador. And 41 years later, 4 patrol pilots docked with my dying ship and saved 6 of my people with their bare hands, because a clause that aide signed told your system to answer. Vasquez didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Keth Sorano had been dead for 37 years, and his quiet act in an empty signing chamber had reached across 4 decades to put her hands on an Oveth wound dressing in a wrecked mess hall. The repair work continued through the night cycle. The engineering tenders sealed the hull breaches methodically, compartment by compartment. The hospital transports reported all critical surgical cases stable. The CVK 1140's power grid came back online section by section, until the bridge lights shifted from emergency amber to standard operational white, and the air recyclers kicked in with a sound like the ship taking a breath it had been holding for 12 hours. At hour 5, Vasquez's fuel reserves hit the threshold where she needed to make a decision. The Kestrels were patrol interceptors, fast, light, limited range. She could refuel from the Resolute's reserves and stay, or she could take her flight back to their patrol station. She refueled, she stayed. Not because she was ordered to. Fleet Admiral Chen hadn't given her a direct order since the operation began. Chen commanded by providing resources and letting her officers make decisions, which was its own form of trust. Vasquez stayed because Subcommander Kell's crew had started coming to her pilots with questions. Operational questions. How does your docking adapter auto-seal? How does your comm system translate frequencies in real time? How do your patrol flights coordinate without a central dispatcher? Small questions, technical questions. The kind of questions people asked when they were learning how another species worked, not because they had to, but because they'd watched that species save their people and wanted to understand the machinery behind it. At hour 7, the Compact's response corvette arrived 12 hours early, because someone at Tovin Station had received Subcommander Kell's transmission and decided that having a single Oveth corvette present when 24 Earthships were stationed around one of their warships was a diplomatic necessity. The corvette's captain, a senior commander named Voss Aaron, hailed the CVK 1140 and demanded a full report. Kell gave it to her flat, factual, without editorializing. The beacon, the 11 hours of silence from Tovin, Earth's treaty clause. The patrol flight, the fleet, the current status. Voss Aaron listened. Then she said, "Subcommander, Earth's fleet is operating inside Compact sovereign space without authorization from Compact Command. They are operating under Article 9 of the Sarith Bilateral Defense Pact, Senior Commander." That pact was not. It was signed. I have confirmed it with Earth's Fleet Command and with the archived treaty record. The sovereign seal of the Oveth Compact is on the document. Whether Compact Command was aware of the signing is a question for Compact Command's archivists, not for the people who just saved my crew. Silence on the channel. "Senior Commander," Kell added, his voice very level, "Earth's Admiral Chen has been requesting my permission before every action taken aboard my ship. Every shuttle, every repair team, every medical procedure. Your authorization to dock is granted. I suggest you come aboard and see what Earth's fleet has done for our people." Voss Aaron docked. She came aboard and walked through the CVK 1140, through the sealed hull breaches with their fresh molecular bonds, through the restored corridors, through the bridge with its lights at full operational, and she didn't speak for a long time. Vasquez saw her stop at the breach in Section 5, where the Earth Petty Officer and the Oveth Technician had run their first seal together. Voss Aaron ran her fingers along the bond line. It was clean, indistinguishable from the original hull, except for the faint discoloration where two different compounds had blended. She walked through the mess hall. She stopped at the triage tables. Someone from the fleet medical team had left a stack of field notes on the counter, the translation matrix that Darrow had compiled on the fly, matching Oveth anatomical terms to their closest human equivalents, annotated with Eshara's corrections in a shaking hand. Voss Aaron read it. She read it twice. She found Vasquez in the corridor outside the mess hall. "Commander Vasquez," she said. She was older than Kell, her slate-gray skin lined around the mouth and eyes, her uniform impeccable in a way that made Vasquez conscious of the Oveth blood still on her own flight suit. "You were the first on scene. My flight was closest. 4 patrol interceptors. That's what was available. You docked with a foreign military vessel, without authorization from Compact Command. I docked under Article 9. Your people were dying. The paperwork caught up later. Voss Aaron studied her. It was the same look Kell had given her, the look of someone watching a framework they'd relied on for their entire career fail to account for the thing standing in front of them. The Compact will conduct a full review of the Sarith bilateral, she said. The question of the unauthorized signing will be addressed. Understood. In the meantime, Voss Aaron paused. She looked back at the mess hall, at the tables where the wounded had lain, at the viewport through which Earth's fleet was visible, holding station, running lights steady. In the meantime, Subcommander Kell has recommended that the Compact formally acknowledge Earth's emergency response and file a recognition of debt under Oveth military protocol. That's his call. It is. He has also recommended that the Compact reconsider its position on the Sarith bilateral. Vasquez looked at her. The Pact is already active, Senior Commander. It has been for 41 years. A 23-year-old aide made sure of that. Voss Aaron was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Vasquez would later include in her mission report, word for word, because it was the kind of statement that mission reports existed to preserve. Commander, for 41 years, my government has maintained that we are not your allies. For 41 years, your system has maintained that we are. Today, when my ship was dying and my government did not answer, your system was the one that was correct. She turned and walked back toward the docking port without another word. Vasquez walked back into the mess hall alone. The tables were clean. The overhead lights were steady. The food service unit hummed in the corner. Through the viewport, Earth's fleet held station. 24 ships that had crossed 4 sectors for a treaty nobody remembered, and that were now running repairs and treating casualties and fabricating engine components, and doing all of it because a subharmonic signal riding underneath, an Oveth distress beacon, had triggered a 41-year-old clause signed by a dead man. She stopped at the table where the navigation officer had died. Someone had cleaned it. The surface was bare except for a small marker, an Oveth remembrance token, a flat disk of dark metal with a name engraved on it in Oveth script. Vasquez couldn't read it, but she knew what it was. Every species had them in some form. The thing you left on the table where someone stopped breathing, so the table remembered even if the universe moved on. She stood there for a moment. Then she touched the edge of the disk, once, the way you'd touch a headstone or a name on a wall, and left the mess hall. Vasquez stood there for a moment. Then she checked her fuel reserves again, force of habit, and keyed her flight channel. Kestrel flight status. Hollowell 7 is green, fuel at 68% after the top-off. Akafor 11 is green, 64%. Mbeki 14 is green, 71%. Copy all. Will hold station until the engineering tenders complete hull restoration. Estimated 2 more hours. She paused. Good work today, Kestrels. No one said anything heroic. No one said anything about what they'd done. They were patrol pilots who'd answered a distress call that hadn't been aimed at them, put their hands on wounds they'd never trained for, and stayed until the job was done. That was the work. The work was its own answer. Fleet Admiral Chen's final report to Earth's Combined Fleet Command, filed 4 days later, ran 11 pages. It detailed the automated treaty trigger, the timeline of the response, the casualties treated, the repairs completed, the CVK 1140's return to operational status, and the Oveth Compact's formal acknowledgement of Earth's emergency intervention. On page 9, there was a single paragraph about Commander Vasquez's patrol flight. Kestrel flight, 4 interceptor-class patrol vessels, arrived on scene 80 minutes before the main response group. Commander Vasquez's decision to dock with the CVK 1140 and begin triage with no medical equipment, no engineering support, and no authorization beyond the automated treaty clause directly contributed to the survival of 6 critical casualties, who would not have survived the additional 80 minutes until fleet arrival. The flight's universal docking adapters, standard equipment on all Earth patrol vessels, enabled immediate access. Commander Vasquez's pilots performed field medicine under the direction of the CVK 1140's wounded medical staff, demonstrating the cross-species emergency competence that the Patrol Interceptor training program was designed to produce. The paragraph ended there. No commendations were mentioned in the report. Commendations came later, through separate channels, and Vasquez filed hers in a drawer and forgot about it, because the only commendation that had mattered was Subcommander Kell's voice on the bridge of his restored ship, saying, "Your people are welcome aboard." The Sarith Bilateral Defense Pact was formally reaffirmed by the Oveth Compact 11 weeks later. The ambassador's original refusal was stricken from the diplomatic record. Keth Sorano's name was entered into the Compact's register, posthumously, as the signatory of Article 9. The 23-year-old aide who had seen the future more clearly than his ambassador, and who had walked back into an empty signing chamber and pressed a seal that would save 165 lives 41 years later. The reaffirmation ceremony was held at Tovin Station, the same station that had cued the CVK 1140's distress call behind a maintenance cycle. Vasquez was not invited. Patrol flight commanders didn't attend diplomatic ceremonies, but Subcommander Kell had sent her a copy of the signed document through official channels, with a single line in the accompanying message. "For your records, Commander, Article 9, reaffirmed." Kell. She'd read the document once, noted that the Compact's new ambassador, a different one, younger, less certain of the things his predecessor had been certain about, had signed with the same sovereign seal that Keth Sorano had pressed to the original 41 years ago. Then she'd filed it alongside her commendation in the same drawer and closed the drawer. The CVK 1140 returned to active service. Its crew, 165 of the original 167, minus the navigation officer who died on a mess hall table, and the crew member who'd quietly decompensated while a human pilot was checking his splint, resumed their patrol in a corridor that the Compact had abandoned 6 years ago, and that Earth's patrol flights had been quietly covering since. Nobody had asked the patrol flights to cover it. Nobody had ordered it. But the corridor was there, and it was empty, and Earth's pilots flew through empty corridors the same way they docked with dying ships, because the work was in front of them, and they were the ones who showed up. Vasquez flew the Kestrel 9 back to patrol station the next morning. The flight was quiet. The Sarith binary threw long light across her canopy, and the corridor ahead was empty, and her fuel reserves were at 42%, and that was enough. She filed her flight log, closed the entry, and resumed patrol. In the log's final line, in the field marked Additional Notes, she wrote 4 words. Article 9 still holds.